Those of you who haven't yet had the opportunity to meet, my name is Maria. I'm the head of talent development at Betsson Group, and I'm also a doctoral researcher at the University of Glasgow. And if you happen to be in one of our conferences last year, I spoke about unconscious bias, and I spoke about the different types of unconscious bias, one of which was beauty bias. This particular type of bias sparked the interest of many of our attendees who wanted to learn more. So today I decided to speak specifically about beauty bias. Okay, so before we get started, let me briefly explain what you will get out of this session today. So my commitment to you today is to answer 3 questions. The first of which is, what is beauty bias? Second, how does it affect you and how does it affect your company? And third, what can you do as individuals and as companies to mitigate its effects? Okay? And let me start with my first question. What is beauty bias? So a very basic definition of beauty bias is making assumptions about or stereotyping individuals based on physical appearance. Very basic. Now, here is the thing. People often say beauty is subjective or beauty is in the eye of the beholder. But is it really? Instead of answering my own question, I would like us to conduct a live experiment together right now. Okay? So what I would like you to do is take out your smartphones, and I want you to go to slido.com, and you can either scan the barcode or you can join the event using the code Beauty Bias, and I will give you a minute to do that. Okay. Yes, you can still scan the barcode here. So what I'm asking you to do here is I want you to rate the individuals that you see in the pictures based on what you think most people would say about them. Are they attractive or are they not? And I'm going to repeat this because it can be confusing. I'm not asking you to rate them based on your own personal preferences. I'm asking you to rate them based on what you think most people would say about them. Because if I was to ask you to do that based on your own personal preferences, I would effectively be asking you to objectify people. And this is not my intention here, quite the opposite. Okay? And just so that I'm clear, the pictures you're about to see were not selected based on my own personal preferences. These were selected based on a study that was conducted in 2017 by the American Medical Association. So let's start with the first one. Let's see what we see here. Okay, the average score is 4.7. So almost 70% of you guys think that this person is actually beautiful. Okay? So let's move to the next one. Let's see the next one. Okay. Yes. Play the second question. I can see. I cannot see, but I can imagine. Okay, 89%, very high. 4.9% or score, that's the score. I'm going to let him know what you think. What about the next one? Let's have a look at the next one. Okay, it's coming up. What do you think? What would most people say about this individual? See some differences here, right? Average score is 1.9 here. Okay, let's see the next one. We have a couple of more of these. Yep, keep on voting. Let's see. So the average score here is 4.5%. Quite high, isn't it? Okay. And we have one last one. Okay. Okay, so the average score here is 1.6. This is what you think most people would say about this individual. So what do we see here? What is the point that I'm trying to make here? It is true that an individual who is considered to be very beautiful or very attractive by one person might not be considered as attractive by another person. Okay? This makes beauty not entirely objective. It is also true that our perceptions of beauty are influenced by societal and cultural norms, as well as the historical context we live in, the current trends. But the research shows, and you've seen it now, that there is an extent to which people generally agree on an average degree of beauty. And this is not only when they belong to the same racial or cultural background with the person they are assessing, although this does affect their ratings. Okay? So if I would be to ask 100 individuals to rate 10 individuals on physical appearance, they will agree to a certain extent to who is more or less attractive. Okay? Now, you might be thinking, okay, what is it that makes us think that one individual is attractive and another one is not? In other words, what are the criteria or measures of beauty? There are literally thousands of empirical studies on the topic. Last night I did a quick research on the university's database, and I found over 30,000 papers published in the last 10 years. So we are talking about a lot of information. I'm not going to quote all of it today, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to summarize the key criteria and give you some examples. Okay? So the first measure of beauty is the face. Components of facial attractiveness include averageness. This means the proximity to a spatially average face for a population. In other words, the more average your face looks compared to the population you belong to, the more relatable you're perceived to be, and therefore the more attractive. Another element is symmetry. This is typically measured using the half-mirroring technique. So if I was to place a mirror right in the center of your face, your left side would be symmetrical to your right side. Another component is what we call sexual dimorphism. And this means feminine characteristics in female faces and masculine characteristics in male faces. And finally, youthfulness. So these are the facial components that makes us say that someone is attractive or someone is not attractive. So let's see the next one. The next is height. So according to research, height is a significant predictor of workplace success and income, particularly for men. So a meta-analysis found that on average, taller individuals are likely to earn $166,000 more over a 30-year career. Another element is weight. Studies have shown that body shape and size affect workplace success and income, particularly for women. So a recent deep machine learning study found that overweight individuals are less likely to be recommended for a role and be hired, and also are usually overlooked when it comes to promotions. It also affects their income. Finally, clothing. People who wear professional attires, whatever that means in their respective industries and contexts, are perceived to be more competent, more productive, and more reliable. And there is one more element, which is hair. An example of this type of discrimination in the workplace is the discrimination that Black women with natural hairstyles experience. And a recent study found that Black women with natural hairstyles are perceived to be less professional and competent, and are less likely to be recommended for job interviews compared to Black women with straightened hairstyles or white women with either curly or straight hair. So this is just one example of the type of discrimination someone can experience based on these components. Okay, so now we know what is that makes us think that someone is attractive and someone else is not. The question is, why is this important for you? Or you might be thinking, you know what, actually, I'm not really surprised by these research findings. I kind of expected that. Did you? Kind of. If you kind of expected that, this is evidence that beauty is not entirely subjective and that beauty bias actually exists. Okay? So why is this important for you as individuals from a professional perspective? Now, as I said before, beauty bias affects a range of success factors in the workplace, including resume screening and interviews, hiring recommendations, performance reviews, promotion offerings, and income. Okay? All of these factors are being influenced. Generally speaking, attractive individuals are more likely to be recommended for roles and be hired. They're more likely to advance rapidly in their careers through frequent promotions, and they tend to earn more compared to unattractive individuals, as these were defined earlier. Okay? So, for example, let me give you an example of a research. So, researchers sent over 2,000 identical CVs, some of them with no picture, and some of them with pictures of individuals of varying attractiveness levels. And what they found out from this study was that attractive individuals received 36% more callbacks compared to unattractive individuals. So it is significant, it does affect. Above average beauty was found to translate into $230,000 more over a lifetime, over a career. Okay? So it does affect, right? It does affect. It has a significant effect. But it's not only about individuals, it's also about companies. So before I talk about this, I also want to pick a little bit on your brains and talk about the counter effect, okay? The counter argument to this is that attractive individuals, because of the positive way in which they're perceived by others, they tend to develop some distinct skills, such as self-confidence. And because they're more self-confident, they're being perceived as more competent, as more talented, okay? So that's the counter-argument. And I'm going to come back to this point. This is true. Research also supports that. I will come back to this point, but what I'm trying to say here is that, generally speaking, people who do not conform to the dominant beauty standards are likely to be at disadvantage. But this does not only affect individuals, it also affects companies. And why is that? When decisions are made based on beauty, based on physical appearance, companies are likely to suffer from missing out on true talent and competence, which of course will have a consequence because it will hinder their growth and success. It also leads to poor team dynamics. This is simply because if people within the team know or suspect that somebody has received preferential treatment because of the way they look, they're less likely to be willing to collaborate and communicate with them. Research has also found that beauty bias in the workplace leads to decreased self-confidence. And this is because individuals who they themselves know that they have received preferential treatment because of the way they look, this impacts their self-confidence and their self-efficacy. Finally, as you can imagine, unfair treatment and discrimination of any kind, including physical appearance, leads to decreased employee performance. It has an impact on the employer's reputation, and research has also found that it has a negative correlation with customer experience and service quality. Okay? So this is what we know in terms of the negative effects. Let me also talk about the counter effect. Okay? Let's see things from all perspectives. So let me go back here. Nope, this is not working. Okay, I've learned how to use the clicker now. So this is where we are. Okay, so let's talk about the counter effect. We talked about the advantages that attractive individuals have. Do they have any disadvantages? And the answer is yes. So beauty may also lead to discrimination when applying for roles in which appearance is irrelevant, particularly when women apply for what they're considered to be as masculine roles. Research has also found that attractive individuals are more likely to experience discrimination by, say, same-sex individuals. So when women are being assessed by women or men are being assessed by men. There isn't enough research on the non-binary side yet. And finally, they're more likely to be objectified, although research in this area is complex and still evolving. So where do we go from this? We are in a lose-lose situation, right? You're attractive, you have some advantages, some disadvantages, and the other way around. So now that we have defined the problem, let's talk about solutions. Okay? And there are many reasons as to why this happened. Okay? We have the beauty standards promoted by the beauty and fitness industry, the media, and so on. But today I'm not going to deep dive into the causes because I want this to be a solution-focused talk. Okay? So let's talk about what we can do. And first I'm going to talk about what we can do about it from a company perspective. And then I'm going to talk about what you can do as individuals, because I want to save the best for last. Okay? So let's talk about what you can do from a company perspective. And the first thing I will talk about is recruitment. And my first suggestion here is to remove pictures from CVs. And why I'm saying this? Because when you have a picture on a CV, as we said before, there is research that supports that, people are likely to receive preferential treatment. People are likely to be selected because of the picture they have on their CV and not because of their experience and qualifications. Now, you might be thinking, okay, I'm going to, especially if you're recruiters, I'm going to remove the picture from the CV. Nothing stops the hiring manager from going on LinkedIn and searching for the individual. But let me tell you something. It is less likely that they will do it for every single candidate. Okay? They don't have that time. Usually, an average hiring manager takes 6 seconds to review a CV. They're not going to go on LinkedIn for everybody. Okay? That's the first thing. And the second thing is that if we educate them, they will know that the moment you go on LinkedIn, it means that you found this CV interesting for the role. Otherwise, you wouldn't bother. Okay? So you need to question yourself in that moment. So that's my first suggestion. It delays a little bit the bias coming in terms of physical appearance. My second advice would be to delay facial contact. And what I mean by that, this needs to be taken into consideration. What I mean by that is if the role requires any form of test, you have a pre-recruitment test, let's say a language test, you're looking for a language specialist, or you're hiring software developers and you need to have a codility test. If that's the case, do the test before, because if they don't pass the test, they don't have the competence, there's no reason to meet them, right? So they don't have the competence for that particular role. This delays the facial contact, and this also gives some reassurance to the hiring manager that the person has the competencies. My third advice is to define clear and measurable recruitment criteria and stick to them. If you're hiring for a job, you should know what it is required from that individual. What do you think are the criteria that will make the person succeed in the role or not? And stick to them. And don't apply different criteria to different people, because this can happen as well. As Lena said before, sometimes our bias comes in. And so we tend to say, if we like someone during the interview, if you think that we are connecting with them, we're very likely to say, okay, maybe we don't really need the last thing. We can do without it. But if that was the case, why did you put it there in the first place? Then my suggestion is also to conduct structured interviews. And what I mean by that is not go out there and ask the exact same questions in the exact same order to every individual, okay? This would make the job of the interviewer and the hiring manager a bit redundant, wouldn't it? But what I'm trying to say here is that make sure that you assess the same things for all candidates. Okay? So if you say that this is required for the job, make sure that you evaluate this for all the individuals that you have in the pipeline. And my last advice is to educate recruiters and hiring managers. And again, here we need to, I need to draw a line here, because it doesn't mean that the moment you educate them, they're not going to have biases anymore. This is not how it works. We all have unconscious biases, no matter how educated or trained we are. This is simply our brain's way of working. Our brain creates shortcuts to navigate an incredible amount of information that comes our way. And so this is not something you can stop. But by educating yourself, by training yourself and training potentially the hiring managers within your organizations, you're more likely to have that moment where people actually self-reflect and check themselves and say, why am I making this decision now? Is it a rational decision based on competencies, or is it because I simply like the person? So this is what you can do from a company perspective when it comes to recruitment. Now let's talk about performance management, because obviously performance management is also linked to promotions, career advancement, and so on. So my suggestion is to define specific and measurable performance objectives based on the role. And this is something that we do internally at Betsson Group. We follow the OKR methodology. We make sure that people are being evaluated on a fair, impartial basis. And then evaluate the performance based on these set objectives. So the element of bias, beauty bias or any other bias, is not completely eliminated, but it is minimized. Yeah? So this is what you can do as a company. Now let's talk about what you can do about it as individuals. And my first suggestion is no more self-depreciation. Nobody will believe in you if you don't believe in yourselves. It's as simple as that. Okay? It's a very simple thing to say. It's a very hard thing to do. So how can you actually do that? My advice is practice positive self-talk. Okay? At the beginning, it might sound really uncomfortable. Why am I doing this? It sounds stupid. But the more you do it, the more you will see the positive effect. And we have research on this as well. Positive self-talk leads to increased focus and self-confidence. And if you have self-confidence, you're more likely to be perceived as competent. Okay? Again, if you don't believe in yourself, nobody else will believe in you. And that's simply because you know yourselves better. If you say you can't do this, who am I to say you can? You know yourself. You've been living in that body and that mind for many years. So you should know better than me, right? My second advice is to practice speaking with clarity and confidence. Yes, it is about competence, but it's also how do we communicate our work to others. Okay? And it's not only because when we talk about speaking, people think of public speaking. Oh, I need to go onto that stage and speak. But it also applies to everyday conversations you have with your colleagues in these meetings. Okay? So my advice is practice. Now, people say practice makes perfect. Personally, I don't believe practice makes perfect. I believe practice makes progress. Okay? So practice. Get out of your comfort zone, get onto that stage, or get onto that call and say, this is my work, I would like to present it to you. Third, work on your nonverbal communication. Have you ever heard of the rule of 7, 38, 55? No? Yes? Somebody has? So this is the rule of effective communication, and what it basically says is that 7% of, or let me rephrase this. So you have effective communication. 7% of it is the verbal. It's the words that you say. 38% is the vocal, the tone of your voice, your accent, the way you communicate. 55% is facial. Face expressions play a big role in the way you're perceived, how effective your communication is. But also gestures, okay? How you move in the room, what energy you bring to that room. And also, when you're presenting, don't hide behind objects. When you meet somebody, give them a warm handshake. My next suggestion is to create a personal brand to communicate your value. Okay? Showcase what you've been doing in your job. Yes, attractive individuals are likely to have some advantages, but hard work, dedication, competence, and confidence are more likely to serve you in the long run. And finally, build a professional network. Now, you might be thinking, okay, how can I do actually this without me sounding like I'm bragging to my colleagues about my achievements? Okay, because this is a fear that we have. One advice I would give is go on LinkedIn, for instance, and post about your achievement. Something of substance, not something you've done, something that you're proud of. Or if you don't feel comfortable doing that, you can simply go on LinkedIn and post about this conference. Talk about your key takeaways from this conference. Okay? You can tag me so that I can see what you have there. So that's a little bit about what you can do about it. Okay? As I said before, yes, research shows that attractive individuals are likely to receive some advantages. But again, it's all about confidence, competence, and hard work and dedication. So at the beginning of this session, I promised to answer three questions. What is beauty bias? How can it affect you as individuals and your companies? And what can you do about it to mitigate its effects as individuals and as companies? So my question here now is, have I delivered on this promise? Yeah? Thank you. Thank you very much. How are we on time? Okay. So does anyone have any questions? We have some time. No? Yeah? Caroline, go ahead.
You said you have researched this area.
Mm-hmm.
But did you write some study on this, or what did you do? Oh, everyone cannot hear. I was just wondering about your background within researching this. If it was this specifically, or whatever you did research on.
Okay, that's. I hope this is an interesting question for everyone. So, as I said before, I'm a doctoral researcher at the University of Glasgow. My research focuses on leadership development, not specifically for women, although I have written and published papers on women's leadership development. But last year, I did a lot of research because I was writing a paper, and I did a lot of research on unconscious bias. And there were the affinity bias, you might have heard of the different types. And beauty bias was one of them. And when I talked about it in last year's conference, people were like, I have never heard of this. This is really interesting. And this is when I started doing my research. And I did the research for the conference, for you guys. I have the references in the presentation if you would like to have a look at them. There's a ton of research on this topic. But as I said earlier, today is all about summarizing and giving you the key insights. Yep, go ahead.
Good question. Betsson's huge. We have a lot of departments, a lot of people, hiring a lot of people. Where do you experience the biggest beauty bias? In what kind of roles or departments you think that I'm hiring, I need to make hiring managers more aware of beauty bias?
Now, it's very difficult to highlight it. There's no validated test that says, somebody has hired somebody based on beauty bias or any other form of bias, any other form of unconscious bias. But if you're an experienced recruiter or somebody who works closely with the hiring managers, you can question them. When they say, for instance, why did you hire this person? I had a gut feeling. Well, gut feeling is not good enough, okay? So this is a good indication that there's bias there. So I would say this is an indication. And then ask the question. If you feel like somebody, obviously you can't really go and say, you made a decision based on, or you're being biased here. I wouldn't say that. First of all, because you don't know if they're biased or not. But what you can say is ask the question, why did you select this person? Why do you think this person is good for the job? And if they can come up with a convincing answer, then okay. If not, then you have to ask more questions. And eventually, what I say is, perhaps you need to point out the bias in a very kind and polite way, because it is unconscious. They're not aware of it. I hope I answered the question.
Hi, Maria. First of all, fantastic presentation and
Thank
very
you.
interesting. When you look at on a larger scale, we're not talking Malta, maybe in your studies, did you notice any difference in different continents? So in Europe, is it one way, America another way, Asia another way, the way they base the beauty? Or you think it's similar all over the world?
This is a really interesting question. I hope you all heard it, if there is difference between the different cultures and so on. So what research says is that it does affect people's ratings. So people who belong to the same racial or cultural background are more likely to assess each other as more attractive or beautiful in general. And this obviously means that there's more bias in there. But what happens nowadays, due to globalization and due to social media, many of the beauty standards have changed, have been globalized now. So we experience a lot of that. And there's also social media and TikTok and everything, so all the trends are now becoming global. So our perception of beauty is also becoming a little bit more global. The differences do exist. Okay? What is considered as beautiful in Japan, for instance, might differ from what is considered to be beautiful in America. But it still comes down to the measures that I mentioned earlier. When it comes to face, for instance, we talked about averageness, symmetry, sexual dimorphism, and so on. Any other questions? Okay. I hope you found it interesting. If you want to find out more, you can always connect with me. You can always contact me.